Yeah, I'm not sure why. It's like every time I get close to doing this review, I just kind of, I don't know, I get kind of like depressed about everything. Like I don't want to do it. I mean, I don't know. What do you think that is? I'm sorry. That was really insensitive of me. Good evening, kaiju fans. The kaijuologist is back. He's trotted out his webcam, and he's here to discuss arguably the most depressing film in all of kaiju film history. That's right. That's right. Tonight we get to talk about the super optimistic Godzilla versus Destroyah, 1995, our conclusion to the Heisei period, and for a short amount of time, the assumed conclusion to the whole franchise. Of course, TriStar had to show up and shit on everything, so Toho had to get back and correct that. So as opposed to just jumping into the weepy, bitter stuff at the end, I figure, stay true to your format. You know, uh, the kaijuologist likes his categories. This film falls very much in the versus category. This is a movie promising you every step of the way you're going to see two kaiju fight. And, I have some criteria for that, and honestly, that is one of the bigger failings of this film is it's not a great versus film. In my opinion, a great versus film, both side plots with both kaiju are overlapping in a creative, clever way that you really understand, and there is a really solid justification for why the kaiju have to duke it out, right? And I mean, you would think with a monster like Destroyah, who is, part of the legacy of the Oxygen Destroyer, wouldn't be here without the Oxygen Destroyer. There's like a poetic nod in the script to him being a great foe for Godzilla. But this movie is in two different places constantly. Even the cast, you have like the Destroya science crew and our reporter, the Yukari Yamane daughter. Um, and then you have the military and our psychics constantly chasing Godzilla and Godzilla Jr. And it's really not until like maybe the last 20 minutes of this movie that it even makes sense that the monsters are crossing paths. And it really makes sense that Godzilla has to fight Destroya. Almost any other Heisei film, Godzilla is either facing an enemy who was designed almost specifically to come kill him, or he's just in a pissed off mood and he's gonna go defend his turf. This movie, his whole goal is just to see Godzilla Jr. again. He's not worried about Destroya. He doesn't know anything about Destroya. He doesn't give two shits until the last few minutes where Destroya kills Godzilla Jr. And now you have an absolutely fantastic justification for a kaiju battle. It's just a shame that with the running length of this movie that it took that long to give you a proper justification for why you got to have these two monsters battling now, right? So then I guess I don't know. You knock out the human cast. The human cast here is just it's a mixed bag. It's frustrating, honestly. They all come across as really bland. And normally I make a point to actually hold directors accountable, especially in film where between the director, the editor, the producer, you have a whole team of people who have 100 angles trying to get the right performance out of an actor. And when you have a whole movie at the end of the day where everything just feels bland and annoying and like no one really cares, I kind of think that has to come down not so much to your performers as to the people who are piecing together their performances. That said, I'm not impressed with this cast. I didn't really particularly like any of the actors. The scientist who's tracking Destroya and creating his own micro oxygen, he's decidedly unlikable. The first like 20 minutes of the movie, he's kind of a dick, especially to our reporter, our Yamane female reporter. Like she's asking him some pretty legit questions, and he just kind of keeps shrugging her off, like, "You're dumb. Reporters are dumb. Everything you're saying is dumb." And it's like, dude, you're the one who's this close to creating like the ultimate killing machine. Shouldn't you be taking any of this seriously? And then he's like, well, what does he say? He's an optimist. He's a romantic. He just doesn't think humans would make weapons like that anymore. Dr. Serizawa, I'm sorry he sacrificed himself, but we just aren't like that anymore. And it's a very weird, arrogant position. And even worse is the fact that the actor, at no point do you believe that he is romantic or optimistic about anything. He's always looking grim and sad and moody. So why am I supposed to believe that you're like, have all this great hope about the next world of science, that there's not going to be like chemical warfare, dude? He's annoying. The female reporter character, it's a nice tie-in with the Yamane family, but I'm never quite sure why she is so happy to trot around with our other scientist, who's rude to her frequently. She's there for a really good scene where she trips in the mud and has to get attacked by a monster. That whole we'll talk about that later. That whole thing is kind of it's funny. It's like some of the stronger cinematography in the movie, and it's also like one of the most frustrating sequences in the movie. Who else do we have? We have our fanboy Godzilla dude, who also is part of the Yamane family. They're both I forget the character's name, but he's adopted by Dr. Yamane back in '54 Gojira, right? And then we get the nice Mamako Kochi comes in and reprises her role as Emiko, which is lovely. Like, as a fan, I can't help but love that, but they could have done more with her. They could have done more with this whole family connection. They keep bringing up Serizawa, but it never feels like there's a lot of consequence to it. It feels like a very, very much a missed opportunity, and yet at the same time, this movie would be really flat and inspiring without that connection. So I'm glad it's there. I just wish they went further with it. That said, our new scientist kid that they brought in, he's been studying Godzilla's heart. He understands this whole meltdown thing, or he has a theory, and everyone just takes it wholesale right off the bat. But I like his introduction. I like that he's excited to meet Miki Sagusa. I love, it's one of the nicer nods. This film has a lot of just cute little references to the larger legacy, the Godzilla cinematic universe, not just the Heisei period, the larger universe. But I like that they come to his apartment and he has all the posters of all the old Godzilla suits. Like, he has pictures and he has toys, and it's kind of a fun little wink wink nod nod moment I think the production team is having with you, that now like the Godzilla fanboy is part of the military apparatus. I do like that, but his opening scene, he's kind of this funny, quirky, like young teenage dude, and then the second he's like in the military office, he just does. He's so serious. Even when he meets Mickey, who apparently he idolizes, he's just immediately like, Godzilla Jr.'s dead. Everyone's gonna die. Everything about this movie is sad, so I'm gonna stop emoting for the next 2 hours. And it's like, God damn it, I wanted somebody who was... Maybe that's the problem with this cast. Everyone is just here the whole movie. My acting teacher would call that Nebraska. It's very flat. Where are the peaks and valleys? So I would be remiss if we're going to have that discussion about the cast. We absolutely have to hit up Megumi Odaka, who has been playing Miki Sagusa for the better part of a decade now. The poor girl. And it's a frustrating balance with this movie with her. I would argue even in Space Godzilla, the plot did a better job of writing in her character in a meaningful way. That there was really something there she had to do and accomplish and be a part of. I mean, most of this movie is just her doing like a Scooby-Doo detective thing, trying to find where Godzilla Jr. is. and even that she's not even good at anymore. She's like, I don't feel him. I don't feel him. Oh, there he is. He's at a beach. Thank God he's alive. Now I'm gonna lure him back into Tokyo, probably for his death. I know, poor Mickey. It's like she's the only character who keeps getting tossed these weird things about like, do you love the human or the monster more? And the script gives this poor actress like all of 2 seconds to make that decision. And of course, she gets stuck in like, what is it, the Star Trek Dr. Spock thing, like the needs of the few and the needs of the many, and she's always got to make that call. It's a shame that the series never actually like gives her some gravitas to make it mean anything. Okay, that said though, we do, I think by the end, the scene where her with Godzilla Jr. is finally a moment. She gets to show some real vulnerability, really work her acting chops. And I don't quite, it's been like 4 years since I've seen this. And I saw this movie first when I was like 10. I had a Japanese bootleg. I also cheated. I looked up online the plot. I knew Godzilla Jr. was gonna die. But it's been a while, and I was surprised actually how gut-wrenching that scene was with Mickey and Godzilla and the dying Godzilla Jr. And it feels nice. It feels like finally there is a moment where we built up all this continuity and all this, baggage this poor character has had to carry around for years and years and years, and now finally she has a moment to release it and acknowledge it, and it's just a shame the script and all the other subsequent scripts building up to this moment didn't give her more. I really think in so many ways you could make this argument. You're going to have to strain for it. But there's this parallel between her and Godzilla as these two really lonely entities who are constantly stuck in impossible situations, who are constantly just alienated from everything, but still have like a calling or a duty to pursue, and they both keep crossing paths and kind of communicating. And especially here it is, the movie where what's Godzilla's skill? It's his radioactive abilities, properties, and now they're killing him. His heart is melting, he's going to lose it. Here's this film, Mickey is now losing her psychic powers. They're starting to go away. Both of them are, there could be a really smart mirror discussion happening here. This is something Honda was usually really smart and subtle about, and these films just never got there with Mickey. And it didn't even occur to me until this film, the kind of parallel tragedies of them. There is a nice little scene with Mickey and there's the other psychic girl, Maru, something. And our other psychic girl's like, I can't wait to not be a psychic. I want to go get married and have a normal life. I know. It's not very progressive. I'm sorry, female fans. But Mickey like looks at her like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that, a normal life. Weird. Yeah, I guess maybe that would be nice. I don't know. Let me go watch all my monster friends die first, and we'll talk about normal life. It's a missed opportunity, but at the same time, this movie is in a lot of ways my favorite time with Mickey. It finally, it's not that the plot knew what to do with her, but they finally gave the actress some moments to have some payoff for all the things she's had to do. And it's surprising too, because watching all the other films, you might not know that Megumi Odaka is actually a fully capable actress, because she was rarely given anything to work with. She's not bad, and it took us like 7 films to realize it. So let's transition from our characters into our plot. I will admit, as far as plotting goes in this period of Godzilla films, this is a much more stable, sound product. There are almost no characters where we don't understand their relationship to everyone else in the room. We understand their motives, and they are there beginning to end, and all have a moment to play some consequence in the actual plot. And that sounds like it should just be bare minimum, and yet when you think about where half the Showa period was, and then you think about some of the just over the top plot on top of plot on top of plot that you get in the Heisei period, especially the last two films in this series, just had way too many working ends that rarely paid off meaningfully. I feel like in comparison, this is a pretty tight little product that keeps most of the ideas, most of the characters, most of its working ends on the table, reminds you of them steadily, and finishes up with everyone. The Super X gets to play a role, scientists get to play a role, even the reporters in a helicopter who comes to help save Mickey at the end. Everything's there, top to bottom. You know, one thing I have to bring up with this plot too, though, and it's very much a mixed blessing. It's like one of those things that if you're a big Godzilla fan or if you've just been watching the Heisei period, I mean, the Heisei period in a lot of ways was what I kind of grew up with. I mean, I saw some of those movies before Destroyah even came out. And to me, when growing up as a little kid, they seemed like really cutting edge and almost Hollywood smart and clever. And, you know, as I've gotten older, I've developed a lot more criticisms of the series. But one thing this plot is doing is throwing a lot of really nice casual nods to people who've been following along. I talked about our Godzilla fanboy who has all his toys. But there's other more subtle and more interesting things, honestly. I think one of the less obvious ones is the sudden inclusion of the Super X3, right? Super X3. Okay, I mean, that's kind of cool because I liked the Super X well enough back in Biollante, back in Return of Godzilla. It makes the continuity, or not the continuity, it just makes the universe kind of weird and marshmallowy, right? The last two movies have been all about, like, we took the Futurian alien cyborg technology and we created giant transforming robots out of it. And now we're back to the Superjet from the 80s, and we've attached wings to it because why not? I actually like the wings, but it makes no sense. And then the people are back in the cockpit. It's just putting people in danger when even in the 80s we didn't have to do it. So why? Like, why anything about the Super X? Now, mind you, though, Super X3, some really cool, like the freezing effect that they do on Godzilla's face looks good. And then the end battle with Destroyah and Godzilla, the Super X is there and is playing an important part. Okay, last thing with the Super X, though, it's really weird, the introduction of the Super X, because literally everyone, like, in the military control room seems really surprised. They're like, the Super X is going out, and it's gonna freeze Godzilla, and they're all like, oh, the Super X, Super X3, what? Like, yes, and then they do a quick, like, little minute spiel of exposition to catch you up, like, we redesigned it, and now it has freeze cannons, and it's like, and nobody knew this? Nobody knew you were developing this super weapon? Whatever. There's some of the other nice nods. I mean, right away from the top of the film, you get the kanji symbols of Gojira from the first 54 Gojira, which, boy howdy, does that go a long way in setting the mood for the movie you're about to sit down and watch. I like the scene in the aquarium where the little microscopic Precambrian Destroyahs are eating the fish. It's a really nice little toss back to that scene in the first 54 Gojira where Serizawa shows Emiko the power of the oxygen destroyer, where she sees the fish dissolving. It looks good, and it's, again, you've been watching the series long enough, you'll catch right away what a fish dissolving in Godzilla means a lot of things. I've also wondered, too, if the fish thing is also, if someone on this production team had a thing about the smog monster, because the way the fish look really gross at the end looks similar to some of the shots, but also the thing that I've always heard referenced with this movie is how Destroyah seems to go through the exact same evolutionary stages of Hedra. You know, they start off as tiny little microscopic fish, they build into like a bigger, more solid fish or two, and then they turn into a flying form, and then finally they converge into this giant Titanic looking monster. I mean, it's it's not exactly subtle. You'd catch this cycle, but I always kind of wondered what if there was supposed to be a larger connection or what that even was. I don't know. Before we move too far away from the plot, I do have to acknowledge this film more so than maybe any film in the Heisei period. You can maybe make some arguments with some of the earlier ones. This is a film that has a theme it wants to discuss and has thought about it thoroughly with a lot of its characters, a lot of its imagery, and a lot of its cinematography, or even the color palette. Like, no, very rarely in the Heisei period do I get the sense anyone had the decision that, like, there is a discussion here and a color palette that has to say something to its audience, that has to get you in the mindset. Because most of the Heisei period, it's just quick, cheap commercialism. They need to produce a movie and get it done fast. This film does feel like we slowed down and we paid attention to details. I mean, almost it was like they were trying to remember the way Honda used to be really good at films. He could do a fast movie, but he could also put some heart and soul into it. I will admit, as flawed as parts of this film are, I do feel like there was a production team here that had some thoughts and wanted to communicate something. I was talking about the color palette. It's interesting. If the next time you watch it, notice, first of all, how bleak so much of it is. So many things are whites and grays. It's just a movie that there's very little color that offers you any sort of optimism. The color you see all the time is bright freaking blood-ass red. Destroyah, but it pops up other places too. This is a movie about death. In a way, a lot of kaiju films, frankly, are not strictly about death. Maybe the original 54 Gojira, right? There's cinematic critiques that talk about that as Godzilla is the metaphor of death. He is the Grim Reaper, but there's also room for other variations there. There's really no other variation for me about how you discuss a film like Godzilla versus Destroyah. For one, I mean, most fans know the advertising campaign was very overt about it. I forget if it was the poster, the teaser trailers they put out. It's like, Godzilla meets his demise. It's written like right there, and that's how they're trying to get you to the box office. They're trying to pull a Superman on you. The one character that never dies is gonna die, folks. Get a ticket. But it's more than that too. I mean, the opening shot is Birth Island has now apparently received too much radiation, or there was an accident. What happened was there was a sloppy little plot element, and now Godzilla Jr. is presumed dead. The whole island itself is gone, and Godzilla is now wandering around and super irradiated and is just, again, bright freaking red and looks both like he's overheating and also like he's just bleeding. Like, if you kind of grainied up this Godzilla suit, it would kind of just look like a lot of wounds on the body. But it's a great opening shot. I never had the thought until I watched it this time. It's simplistic, it looks decent, and it tells you everything about this movie. Because what's the other big challenge of this movie for the plot is the fact that the entire Earth, the atmosphere is going to catch on fire, or Godzilla is going to melt through the Earth's crust. It's going to be what you just saw on this island times 100 million, folks. It's a quick little shot that sets up and parallels everything you're about to have to deal with this movie. And in that way, it's smarter than a lot of Heisei films ever even wanted to try to be. I mean, we talked about the fish dying. God, what was the other? There was some other death thing. Skeletons, that was it. There's a lot of scenes with our Godzilla fanboy. I think maybe it was even in Emiko's apartment. If you watch, there's dinosaur bones and skeletons and fossils that are just in the background of shots frequently. I don't think randomly. I think actually for their last hurrah, Toho thought, let's let's put some effort. Let's think about this. Let's try and give this like the real classic Godzilla treatment back in the day where we cared. I think, I mean, let's get to our title monster first and foremost, Destroyah. God, that's a fun name to say. It always will be. So Destroyah fits very much into what am I trying to say? He is a Heisei monster. He makes perfect sense for the Heisei period, right? Most Heisei monsters, all Heisei monsters, go through an evolution of some sort, right? Biollante does, King Ghidorah does, Mechagodzilla, lesser extent. He gets the Garuda ship, and Space Godzilla, I suppose, just has his flying crystal cocoon. But I mean, Abatra, for the most part, these all have to transform, and Destroya is like, go for it, everywhere crazy. I want a lot of forms of Destroya, right? And to a mixed effect, I actually like most of the forms, the designs of Destroya. Now, mind you, the first scene where we have the weird, bizarre pseudo alien ripoff. I mean, could you even call it a pseudo ripoff? The thing about it is, if it didn't have the weird, stupid little like secondary mouth that came out, what about that design would make you think of a xenomorph? But they deliberately film so much of that opening to look like scenes from, I mean, Ridley Scott, but more so, I think, Cameron with Aliens. And okay, so I have to do devil's advocate here. On some level, it's a fun action sequence. How many times, or especially in the Heisei period, do you have humans dealing with kaiju who are like human size? And I like the way the music cuts and everything gets kind of quiet and tense. But then when the action kicks in, it's a really mixed bag. There are some shots I think actually are really good looking, like could maybe even slip into a Hollywood film at the time. And then there's a lot of shots where the effects are ridiculous, and the editing is a big problem in this movie. It's not just Destroya. There are moments where people are in one spot and they're in another. Godzilla Jr.'s battle in Tokyo, where he's over here and suddenly he's over here blasting something. The editing, there's some problems here. But this sequence in the underground tunnels with the little Destroyas, it always kind of made me think of the Meganulons from Rodan, and the way, they would corner people in these dark, tight little spots underground, like there's kind of a claustrophobia. I don't think it was an homage or reference. I think it was what most of the Heisei period was doing, was finding a scene to rip off some other Hollywood movie. I mean, we ripped off Terminator, we ripped off Raiders of the Lost Ark. Aliens up for grab too, folks. So then Destroya evolves, right? And they get bigger, the little crab monsters get bigger, and now we're blasting them with winter rays. This is a fun sequence too, folks. You might know the sequence I'm talking about. It is well known and publicized that for certain shots, they actually used the Bandai toys. The little Destroya Bandai toys. It's his second kind of crustacean form. They used the toys. I'm gonna throw out a theory. I actually think that might have been kind of a subtle inside jab from the production team. It is a point of contention with the Heisei period that a lot of people think a lot of these movies were centered around marketing, specifically toys and products, right? Toho advertised and pimped these movies like no one's business. Toho released merchandising rights everywhere they could. Even if a Godzilla movie in the 90s didn't do great at the box office, they made bank off of action figures and product placement. And some people really detest that. I've even read like people weirdly enough, they blamed Koichi Kawakita, the special effects director, that was all he was doing backstage, was like, no, we need a toy. How about Batra evolves for no good reason? I think that's a little cynical, but it's also the 90s, and Japan's at its height of commercial power with where the industry is at the time. It's maybe not unrealistic, but I wonder if by the time this movie's rolling around, They had heard this complaint, they understood this criticism, and they actually thought it was kind of a funny little wink wink nod moment that, oh, we just make our movies to make toys and make merchandise off little kids. Well, now the movie and the toy are one and the same, bitches. That's right, the toys are here, and you're not even going to be able to buy them for like 4 more months. But they're on our set. This is my theory that I don't have anything to other than other historical critiques to back it up. I've never heard anyone espouse this theory, but it's weird, right? Like, why are you using the Bandai toys for a film that hasn't even been released yet? Product placement, folks. It's in your brain. It's a thing. So flying Destroyah, there's not a lot to say there. It's really towards the end where Destroyah turns into this giant mammoth, crazy looking thing that finally you feel like these aren't just weird alien characters. Now you have a proper kaiju in front of you, pretty outlandish and demonic, and I've got to give it points. Like, there's just no kaiju that looks anything like Destroyah. I mean, Toho pulled out all the punches with this character design, and it does, I mean, reflect his personality. I mean, the way he kills Godzilla Jr., fans are still sad and upset about that. I'm upset about that. It's an awful sequence to watch. And in that way, it's nice that Destroyah, for the last villain, really does look and feel like a villain through and through and through. I mean, you thought Space Godzilla was nasty. He just put Marshmallow Godzilla into a crystal cave. This dude just comes out of nowhere and kills Godzilla Jr., just brutally mangles and throws him down in the building. It's pretty awful. But it gives you the sense of the character, and then it gives you that burn of, like, there are very few kaiju. Even when you know, like, Gigan's the bad guy, King Ghidorah's the bad guy, you rarely sit there in your seat and are like, I want to see that kaiju fucked up so bad. I want that kaiju bleeding to death right now, rip off its arm. And Destroyah does that in a way I'm not sure any other kaiju has or ever will. You want that fucker messed up bad for what he did. And so on some level, I do have to acknowledge Destroyah as a success. So then I think transition to Godzilla Jr., who is kind of surprising how much you love him, because none of his other incarnations are quite as just immediately likable. Like when baby Godzilla is born, he's not bad. He looks better than Minya ever did, but it still kind of feels like a cheap commercial angle that you get with like 90s Heisei films, that they just throw every plot element they can at you. And it also does feel like reviving an unnecessary part of the Godzilla franchise. You know, the last time Godzilla had any other Godzilla or offspring, it didn't do anything for the franchise. It didn't do any good for anybody. That said, though, it's cool. There's really no other kaiju that you see such a complete beginning to end with the way you do with him. You see him hatch. You see the birth of this poor little monster. You see him go through the fear of confronting another Godzilla. Then you see him turn into an overstuffed marshmallow and get attacked by a space alien, because why not? But now you see him looking like Godzilla and feeling like the whole movie is kind of supposed to be a build-up to that he is the proper heir to the Godzilla legacy, and he is going to grow up and do what his... I don't know, they never flesh it out. I actually like that they don't flesh it out, but it's like his cousin, or maybe his brother, or something. They're related. It almost makes no sense that it could be a father-son relationship, but they're related somehow. And I do appreciate the way the battle with him and Destroyah is handled. It looks good. It's more interesting than a lot of Heisei battles are. And like I was saying earlier, you just root for him because he's not as powerful as Big Godzilla. And here he is up against a monster who was born after the auction in Destroyer. Like, Destroyer's got to be some bad shit. And he does. I mean, it looks like an uneven match for a long time. And I hate that scene where he, the little mouth stabs Godzilla Jr.'s neck. I have a thing with necks. I don't like it. Even if it's a rubber suit, I don't like it. It's just gross and looks painful. But then the death of Godzilla Jr. is, I mean, it's what the whole movie's warning you. This is a movie about death. Everything about this movie is sad. Um, so it's like you should see it coming. And if you were like me and you cheated and looked up the plot before you saw the movie, then you definitely knew it was coming. And yet it's still just, it's a gut wrenching little moment. It's just not, it's very different than most kaiju deaths. And I suppose we'll use that just to springboard into Godzilla now, because he's kind of the last point of this review is, and what makes this movie so unique and kind of hard to review is even with all these other weird, sloppy, or even just mediocre plot elements around you, at the end of the day, this is a movie that really takes some time to help you feel for Godzilla in a way you probably haven't since maybe the 54 version. And even then, when that version died, it wasn't a franchise. It wasn't your childhood icon who always saved the day, who always beat the bad guys, or even when he was the bad guy, you still couldn't help but root for. This is like finally that moment of really closing the series. And in a way, I admit, I find pretty damn satisfying. But it's just it's like you never really prepare yourself for it. You never, you think you see it coming, you think you're ready, and you've made sense of it. And it's just, it's different than you think it's going to be. It's harder than you think it's going to be. So I was thinking about this, the whole element of Godzilla having another Godzilla in this universe that he keeps coming back to and wanting to interact with. This idea of Godzilla as a lonely character is really prevalent in the Heisei period. It's one of the few things the Heisei period does really well. And I'd always thought of it in relation to, Godzilla Jr. I found a read-up like a week, a read-up, dear God, it's late, a write-up like a week ago on this film where they talked about how this concludes one of the main elements of the Heisei period, which is loneliness. And it doesn't just start with Godzilla Jr. This person brought up the fact that it really even goes back to the first Godzilla, 1984, Return of Godzilla. What is one of the first things we discover about this incarnation of Godzilla? He chases after the birds. And we come up with this whole theory about the bird brain thing, that Godzilla has a similar wave pattern or whatever. And he's looking for a flock. He's following other animals. He's looking for any sort of comfort to be around something like him, to be part of an animal herd. From there you move into Biollante, where it's very explicit in that plot that they are, genetic doubles. He feels Biollante out there and is attracted to her, wants to come and meet this monster that's like him. It's to a lesser extent, but in King Ghidorah, the whole Godzillasaurus sitting there dying all alone, that the Japanese soldiers have to leave him, and then he gets irradiated anyway, and then he gets irradiated again by another submarine. And then even when the little tiny baby Godzilla is born, he's like the size of a human, even giant menacing Godzilla himself still senses it out there and wants to meet another member of his species. And it is one of the small, subtle things I hadn't even really noticed that is constantly driving each of the Heisei period films. And then this whole movie is about him. Where's Godzilla going? And once they realize Junior's still alive, he's traveling to Junior. He wants to get back to the little comfort he gets from this other Godzilla. And then it makes it just all the more devastating that he gets there, he meets him, they don't get a touch, but they're this close, and then Destroyah kills him. And Godzilla goes full rage, anarchy, and just starts, hammering Destroyah as he should. Because don't we all want it? But I mean, that last scene where he's trying to revive Godzilla Jr. as he's dying, and it's probably some of the best suitmation in the whole film. Not the Godzilla Jr. prop, mind you. It's dead, so it's not supposed to look very good. But what that actor did when, the physicality, the roar Godzilla gives, you you feel Godzilla's heart break. You feel, Godzilla as this entity of just constant overpowering dominance and violence and anger and 100 goofy other tropes we put on Godzilla. And I don't think there's any other time you see Godzilla as a wounded, vulnerable being who just has lost all hope in all of anything. And I think in some ways it's a very appropriate and it's a very affecting end. Ifukube knocks this out of the park. It's a gorgeous score. The whole movie, honestly, it's some of his best military marches we've heard in a long time. He brought his A game to this through and through and through. And it's just, yeah, it's funny. I think I said it at the beginning. It's it's just not an enjoyable Godzilla film. We usually think of the best films in the series as being the most enjoyable ones. We think of the Mecha Godzillas, or even GMK for what a dark film that is still popcorn enjoyable. This film is just not enjoyable. It took me a while to even want to know how to review it or talk about it. It's decidedly unenjoyable. It has some pretty open ends that aren't as great. It's not the perfect film, but I would say it is a tighter, more solid product than a lot of Godzilla films are, and it works hard to pay some respect to. Yeah, at this point, it's not just another kaiju. It's the hero everyone has loved and rooted for 40 some years at this point. And to kill him and watch that painful meltdown sequence is a film that has to earn it. They have to earn that gravitas, that emotional connection. And for all my criticisms of the Heisei period, something about the continuity helps. Something about all of the 54 references help. And it's a nice button, honestly, for how this series had to go out. All right, Godzilla fans, kaiju fans, thank you for sticking it out. Thank you for having this discussion about this incredibly depressing movie. Like I said, you're just not a fan unless you've sat there and cried watching your favorite kaiju meltdown in front of you. Gotta do it, folks. Anyway, next time, I don't know, let's review something fun, or even something terrible. Let's just review something that isn't talking about so much death all the time. Hey, I thank you for tuning in. I thank you for any and all support. As always, share, comment, post, give me whatever you want to give me. I am the Kaijuologist. I'm signing off from Denver, Colorado. We're the Mile High City. We're getting higher all the time.